Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has been stripped of his remaining royal titles. King Charles has asked for the former prince's Order of the Garter to be cancelled.
The palace is now urging Andrew Mountbatten Windsor to remove himself from the royal line of succession.
King Charles is well known for his views on climate change, and apparently he's now taking steps to make sure that his Sandringham Estate is more eco-friendly.
There are moments in the life of a monarchy when a single detail, a title insisted upon, a beau demanded, reveals more about character than 1,000 official statements ever could. This is the story of one such moment. A moment when King Charles III, already navigating the most turbulent period of his reign, discovered that his younger brother was continuing to demand royal honors that the crown had formally revoked. The discovery sent shockwaves through the palace corridors, and what happened next would test the very limits of family loyalty against institutional duty. If you've been following the British royal family over the past several years, you know that Prince Andrew, now known simply as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, has been at the center of controversy after controversy. But this latest revelation takes his story into new territory. Because while the world watched as he was stripped of his military titles, his patronages, his Royal Highness style, and even his prince title itself, something else was happening behind closed doors. Something that would push King Charles to a breaking point. Let me take you back to October 30th, 2025. Buckingham Palace issued a statement that reverberated around the world. After years of mounting pressure, King Charles had begun a formal process to remove the style, titles, and honors of Prince Andrew. By November 6th, letters patent under the Great Seal declared that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor would no longer hold or enjoy the style, title, or attribute of Prince or His Royal Highness. The New York Times, The Guardian, NPR, and the BBC all confirmed the historic nature of this action. It was the first time in modern British history that a prince had been formally stripped of his titles during his own lifetime. The reasons were clear to anyone who had followed the story. Andrew's association with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein had cast a long shadow over the monarchy. The disastrous November 2019 BBC Newsnight interview, in which Andrew claimed he couldn't sweat and offered the now infamous Pizza Express alibi, had made him a liability. Then came February 19th, 2026, when Thames Valley Police arrested Andrew at Wood Farm on the Sandringham Estate on suspicion of misconduct in public office. Multiple outlets including CNN, Reuters, and The Atlantic reported that he was accused of sharing confidential Treasury documents with Epstein during his time as a trade envoy. Though he was released after 11 hours and has not been charged, the damage was done. By that point, King Charles had already ordered his brother to vacate the Royal Lodge, the 30-room Windsor mansion Andrew had called home for 2 decades. So Andrew moved. Not willingly, but inevitably. He was relocated to a much smaller property on the Sandringham Estate, variously described as marsh farm or cottage, a far cry from the grandeur he was accustomed to. People magazine reported in early February 2026 that Sandringham staff were refusing to serve him. The Express noted that only 3 servants remained willing to work for him, and those staff members were reportedly drawing straws to see who would have to take the assignment. The Sun confirmed in late February that Andrew would have only a skeleton staff, a chef, and a valet, after decades of being waited on by a full household team. But here's where the story takes its most telling turn. Because even as Andrew's world contracted, even as his titles were revoked and his housing downgraded, he refused to accept the new reality. Multiple sources began reporting something extraordinary. Andrew was still demanding that staff address him as Your Royal Highness. He was still insisting that they bow and curtsy when entering a room. And most significantly, he was still using the title Duke of York in private, despite having surrendered it publicly. Rob Shooter, a celebrity reporter who broke the initial story in late October 2025 on his Substack newsletter, quoted a source saying, "The butler still says Your Royal Highness, and the staff still bow." Andrews made it clear, palace rules don't apply inside his walls. Cosmopolitan, Yahoo News UK, and AOL all picked up the story. The Mirror ran a piece in early November headlined, "Andrew's Tyranny Behind Closed Doors," detailing how he continued to enforce royal protocol in his private residence even after being stripped of the right to use those titles publicly. By March 2026, The Telegraph published a column by writer Harry Mount, who recounted a story about a woman who was made to repeat her curtsy to Andrew because she hadn't executed it with sufficient deference. The Express covered another incident in which Andrew made a ludicrous demand to a girlfriend's landlady, insisting she curtsy to him in her own home. The pattern was unmistakable. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was living in a parallel reality, one in which he remained a royal prince entitled to all the deference and ceremony that came with it. Now you might ask, why does this matter? After all, what a man insists on being called in his own home might seem like a private affair. But in the context of the British monarchy, titles are not private matters. They are instruments of state, conferred by the sovereign and revocable by the sovereign. When King Charles formally stripped Andrew of his titles through letters patent, a legal document published in the Gazette, the official public record of the United Kingdom, he was making a statement not just about his brother, but about the institution itself. He was saying that the monarchy must evolve, must hold itself to standards of accountability, and that no one, not even the Queen's second son, was above those standards. So when Charles discovered that Andrew was undermining that very message by continuing to demand royal treatment in private, the king was, by all accounts, devastated. Sources close to the palace, speaking to outlets including Hello Magazine and The Express, described Charles as deeply troubled by his brother's refusal to accept reality. Here was a monarch trying to modernize the crown to restore public trust after years of scandal, and his own brother was sabotaging those efforts from within. Let me give you some context about what King Charles has been dealing with. In the fiscal year 2025 to 2026, the sovereign grant, the public funding for the monarchy, rose to £132.1 million, an increase of £45.8 million driven largely by offshore wind farm profits from the Crown estate. The Guardian and the BBC both reported on this windfall, but they also noted the scrutiny it brought. Every pound of public money spent on the royals is now under a microscope. And here was Andrew, a man no longer entitled to use royal funds or royal titles, still living as though nothing had changed. The palace response, when it came, was measured but firm. According to The Sun's reporting in late February, senior courtiers reminded Sandringham staff that they were under no obligation to use royal titles or perform royal courtesies for Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. The article, published February 22nd, quoted a palace source saying that while staff could address Andrew as Sir out of general respect, they were explicitly not required to call him Your Royal Highness, or bow or curtsy. This was a direct rebuke, a public confirmation that the titles had been stripped not just in name, but in practice. But Andrew, it seems, was not listening. GB News reported as recently as 1 week ago, early April 2026, that palace staff were still emptying the royal lodge of Andrew's possessions, and that Andrew had been seen driving around Sandringham, apparently still settling into his new life. Yet the reports of his insistence on royal protocol persisted. A YouTube video uploaded just 1 week ago documented staff complaints, and Facebook posts from late March described a mass walkout at Sandringham, with employees refusing to serve him. So what does all this mean for King Charles? It means that the king is facing a crisis of authority within his own family. Because if Andrew can flout the sovereign's decrees with impunity, what message does that send to the rest of the institution? What message does it send to the British public, who are footing the bill for a monarchy that is supposed to represent duty, service, and accountability? Let's look at the broader picture. King Charles ascended the throne in September 2022 after the death of Queen Elizabeth II. He inherited a monarchy in transition, one facing questions about its relevance, its cost, and its conduct. He has sought to project an image of a slimmed-down monarchy, one focused on the core working royals, himself, Queen Camilla, the Prince and Princess of Wales, and Princess Anne. Andrew was explicitly excluded from that vision. Princess Anne, by the way, has been a key figure in this story. Hello Magazine reported in January 2026 that Anne completed 457 official engagements in 2024, making her the hardest working royal. Yahoo Entertainment and Pure Wow both described her as the backbone of the royal family. There is a reason for that. Anne represents the old model of royal duty: quiet, consistent, unglamorous work in service of the crown. Andrew, by contrast, represents entitlement without duty, privilege without responsibility. The contrast couldn't be starker. While Anne quietly goes about her work, Andrew is reportedly spending his days in isolation at Marsh Farm. The Express noted in early February that he has only 3 staff members left. People magazine reported that those staff are deeply unhappy, describing Andrew as egomaniacal in his treatment of them. Radar Online published an exclusive in late March quoting staff who said Andrew's insistence on royal protocol had left them furious. And here's the thing. Andrew's behavior is not just an embarrassment to King Charles personally. It poses a constitutional problem, because under the current system, Andrew remains 8th in the line of succession. The BBC reported on October 30th, 2025, that the government had no plans to pass a law to remove him from that line. Al Jazeera noted that while Andrew had been stripped of titles and forced out of his home, his place in the succession remained intact. This creates a bizarre situation in which a man who has been publicly disgraced, stripped of all honors, and is under police investigation, still retains a theoretical claim to the throne. Parliament did consider legislation. WUNC, the LA Times, and Reuters all reported in late February 2026 that UK lawmakers were debating whether to remove Andrew from the line of succession entirely. The move was tied to calls for greater transparency about his time as a trade envoy with Euronews and The Guardian, noting that confidential documents about his appointment and conduct were being released to the public. But as of April 2026, no such law has been passed. Andrew remains in the line of succession, and he remains legally entitled to use the surname Mountbatten Windsor, which brings us back to the Duke of York title. Here's where things get legally murky. Andrew surrendered the use of the Duke of York title in October 2025, as NPR and the New York Times reported. The title was not formally removed, it was relinquished. This is an important distinction. The Express published a piece in late January 2026, noting that under obscure royal rules, Andrew could technically still use the Duke of York title in private or informal settings, even though he had agreed not to use it publicly. The article quoted legal experts who said that unless the title was formally rescinded by an act of parliament, Andrew retained some residual claim to it. This legal ambiguity may be what Andrew is exploiting. By insisting that his household staff use the Duke title and the HRH style, he is asserting a claim that, while morally and publicly unacceptable, may not be strictly illegal in the confines of his private residence. It's a technicality, but it's one that Andrew, who has spent a lifetime navigating the complexities of royal protocol, seems determined to cling to. But for King Charles, this is untenable, because the king cannot allow his brother to undermine the very reforms he is trying to implement. Charles spent decades waiting to be king, and now that he has the crown, he is acutely aware that public support for the monarchy is fragile. Opinion polls have shown declining support, particularly among younger Britons. The windfall from the sovereign grant, while legally proper, has drawn criticism. And every new revelation about Andrew, whether it's his alleged misconduct, his police interviews, or his imperious treatment of staff, damages this institution further. So what can Charles do? Legally, his options are limited. He has already stripped Andrew of his military titles, his royal patronages, his HRH style, and his prince title. He has evicted him from the Royal Lodge. He has cut his funding. Short of an act of parliament removing Andrew from the line of succession entirely, a move that would require government action and set a constitutional precedent, Charles has used every tool at his disposal. But there is one tool Charles still has: moral authority. And that is what we are seeing play out in real time. By confirming through palace sources that staff are not required to use Andrew's former titles, Charles is drawing a line. He is saying, in effect, that the institution will not pretend Andrew's fall from grace never happened. The palace confirmation reported by The Sun is significant because it is a public repudiation of Andrew's private behavior. It is the king saying, no, you do not get to live in a bubble where the rules don't apply. The human dimension of this story is worth pausing on because behind all the constitutional questions and the legal technicalities, this is a story about two brothers. Charles and Andrew grew up in extraordinary privilege, sons of a queen, raised in palaces. But their paths diverged long ago. Charles was groomed for kingship, burdened with duty, his personal life scrutinized and often sacrificed to the demands of the crown. Andrew, as the spare, enjoyed many of the privileges of royalty without the same level of responsibility. He was indulged, some might say spoiled, by his mother, who reportedly saw him as her favorite. That indulgence may be at the root of Andrew's current behavior, because when you have spent your entire life being told you are special, being deferred to, being called Your Royal Highness, it must be extraordinarily difficult to accept that those days are over. Andrew is 66 years old. He has lived more than 6 decades as a prince. And now, in what should be his retirement years, he has lost everything. His titles, his home, his public role, his reputation. The psychological toll of such a fall must be immense. But here's the thing. Sympathy for Andrew's personal struggles does not excuse his behavior. Because while he is suffering the consequences of his own actions, his association with Epstein, his disastrous interview, his alleged misconduct, others are suffering too. The victims of Jeffrey Epstein who have watched Andrew evade accountability for years, the British public who are asked to fund a monarchy that must be beyond reproach, the staff at Sandringham who are being forced to navigate an impossible situation, caught between a disgraced ex-prince who demands deference and a palace that says he is not entitled to it, and King Charles himself, who must balance his duty as sovereign with his love for his brother. The latest reports suggest that Andrew is becoming increasingly isolated. The Mirror's February report described him as spending his days largely alone, with minimal contact even with his daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. Under royal protocol, Andrew, having lost his prince title, is now technically required to bow to his own daughters, who retain their princess titles. InStyle magazine published a piece in December 2025 explaining this bizarre reversal of etiquette. One can only imagine how painful that must be for a man who once outranked almost everyone in the kingdom. And yet, Andrew's isolation is largely self-imposed. He could accept his new reality with grace. He could release his remaining staff from the obligation to perform royal courtesies. He could acknowledge that he brought this situation upon himself and work quietly towards some form of redemption, or at least dignity. But he has chosen not to. Instead, he is digging in, insisting on a status that no longer exists, demanding honors he no longer holds. This brings us to the question of what happens next. Because the situation cannot continue indefinitely. Either Andrew will eventually accept his new status, whether voluntarily, or because his remaining staff finally refuse to indulge his demands, or the confrontation with King Charles will escalate. Some royal observers have speculated that Charles may eventually cut Andrew off financially altogether, forcing him to sell assets or rely on whatever private income he has managed to retain. The ABC reported in November 2025 on the mystery of Andrew's finances, noting that despite his fall from grace, he still seems to have access to funds of unknown origin. Others have suggested that Parliament may eventually act, passing legislation to remove Andrew from the line of succession and possibly even to formally strip the Duke of York title, leaving no legal ambiguity for him to exploit. Such a move would be unprecedented in modern times, but then, again, so is the entirety of Andrew's situation. What is clear is that King Charles cannot allow this standoff to drag on indefinitely. Every day that Andrew continues to demand royal treatment in defiance of the king's decrees is a day that undermines Charles's authority. And in a constitutional monarchy, where the sovereign's power rests on respect and tradition rather than force, authority is everything. There is also a generational dimension to this story that cannot be ignored. Prince William, the heir to the throne, is reportedly even less sympathetic to Andrew than his father is. Multiple reports have suggested that William has made it clear Andrew will have no role in the monarchy once William becomes king. Some sources have even claimed that William has said, Andrew will not be welcome at King Charles's funeral when that day eventually comes. This is the future Andrew is facing. Not just estrangement from his brother, but total exclusion from the institution that has defined his entire life. So as we watch this drama unfold, we are witnessing something profound. We are watching the collision of old royal prerogatives with new expectations of accountability. We are watching a man who cannot let go of a past that no longer exists. And we are watching a king who is trying to save an institution by holding his own family to the same standards he demands of everyone else. The palace confirmation that staff need not use Andrew's former titles is more than just a bureaucratic detail. It is a statement of principle. It is King Charles saying that the monarchy will not be held hostage by one man's ego. It is a line in the sand. But it is also, in its way, a tragedy, because this is a family in crisis, played out on a public stage. These are brothers who once shared a childhood, who once stood together on the Buckingham Palace balcony, who once were part of the same tight-knit royal unit. And now they are locked in a battle over something as fundamental as what Andrew can call himself in his own home. The British people are watching. The Commonwealth is watching. The world is watching. And what they are seeing is a monarchy that is trying, however imperfectly, to hold itself accountable. That is the larger story here, not just Andrew's fall, but Charles's determination that the fall must mean something, that there must be consequences, even for princes, especially for princes. As we come to the end of this story, or rather this chapter, because the story is far from over, I want to leave you with a question. Do you think King Charles is handling this situation correctly? Should he be firmer with Andrew, perhaps cutting him off entirely? Or is he being too harsh on his own brother, a man who has already lost so much? And what do you think will ultimately happen? Will Andrew eventually accept his new reality? Or will this standoff continue until one of them is gone? These are not easy questions, and there are no easy answers, but they are questions worth asking because they go to the heart of what a monarchy is in the 21st century. Can it be both a family and an institution? Can it show mercy while also demanding accountability? Can it evolve without losing its identity? King Charles is trying to answer those questions in real time, and his devastation at discovering that his brother continues to demand the honors of a prince, honors that Charles himself revoked, is a measure of how deeply he understands what is at stake. If you found this video informative, please give it a like. If you want to stay informed about the latest developments in this ongoing story, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. And please share your thoughts in the comments below. This is a story that touches on duty, family, privilege, and accountability. Themes that resonate far beyond the gates of any palace. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.